If there is one film that I think is a must-watch for anybody interested in the history of film, it has to be The Passion of Joan of Arc from 1928. One could talk about The Passion of Joan of Arc forever. It's just a remarkable film, made by Carl Theodor Dreyer in 1928. He had spent a year of his time researching the actual trial of Joan of Arc and taking actual lines of dialogue from the trial. There's an actual transcript of what was said at the trial, and using that in his film. You know, everybody knows the story of Joan of Arc, right? She was a young girl who thought she heard the voice of God tell her to lead the French and to get the English out of France during the 100-Year War. And she was finally captured by the English. She was subject to a brutal interrogation trial period that lasted almost a year before being burned alive at the stake. And ultimately, from the way I understand it, the ultimate charge that got her burned at the stake was witchcraft and cross-dressing. One of the biggest crimes against her was she always dressed like a man, and the church hated that. But basically, they just wanted to get rid of her. But anyway, so let's go back to the film. The film stars Maria Falconetti in what some consider one of the finest performances ever put on film. And from what I understand, Carl Dreyer put her through hell to get those performances. He was one of those directors that would do takes over and over, sort of like the Stanley Kubrick of his day. And he made her kneel on actual concrete during her scenes to make her really uncomfortable and sore and angry to get that performance. And her tears in the film look genuine. You really, it's and what's really odd about this movie, or wonderful about this movie, depending how you look at it, it was shot almost entirely with close-ups. Now, Dreyer had this huge concrete set made, and you see very little of it in the film because it's all tight. And the scenes of her accusers are all done with harsh lighting that shows every nasty blemish on their face, every wart, every pimple, or whatever. Purposely done that way. The actors weren't allowed to wear makeup, which was unheard of back in 1928. Falconetti wasn't allowed to wear makeup either, but she was shot in more friendly lighting with a softer focus. Now the film goes through all the aspects of what the real Joan of Arc went through. They try to trick her in many ways to get her to sign a confession. They bring in a fake letter from the king, and then they take her down to the torture chamber to show her what she's going through, and then drug her. And eventually they bring her out to where she's going to get burned at the stake, and in sort of a drug-induced haze, without really knowing what she's doing, she signs this confession, and she even has the one of her accusers guide her hand to sign her name to the confession, and she ends up going back into her cell, and basically she signed the confession so she would get a lifetime imprisonment and she wouldn't be executed. But then as they cut off all her hair with scissors, and she ends up reflecting on that, feeling guilty that she's betrayed God by doing this, and she recants and calls them back in and says, I shouldn't have signed that, it's not true. And of course this leads to her ultimate execution, which is done pretty brutally in the movie. I mean, it's for 1928, it almost appears like she's getting burned alive. The film is considered one of the true masterpieces of cinema from the silent era, and like I said, Falconetti's performance today is still considered not just a great acting performance from the silent era, but of all time. There's also an interesting history to this film. When it was first made, when it was first cut together, there was a fire and destroyed the original negative. Now, luckily, Dreyer did take after take after take, so he was able to re-edit the movie using secondary takes. Many people assume that the second version wasn't much different from the first version, considering how many takes Dreyer would take of each scene. And we'll never know. But then Dreyer was forced to make edits to the film because it was controversial, and over the years the film's been edited and re-edited and recopied, and then the negative for the second edit of this movie was destroyed in a fire. Now this isn't so surprising because the nitrate film that these films were made on was very flammable, and films were always being destroyed by fire. But all it was left was some beat up, old, edited versions that were around that were in horrible condition and not complete and that type of thing. And pretty much for years and years, everybody thought it was lost forever. And then in 1981, shockingly, in a janitor's closet in a mental institution in Norway, a complete print of the film was found. And no one's really sure how it got there. But experts were able to use this print, restore it, and come up with a really good version that you can see all over the place now. I know it's on YouTube and archive.org. And Turner Classic Movies shows it every now and again. And if you ever get a chance, I know it's 80 minutes. A lot of people don't want to watch a 80-minute movie, but just go ahead and watch it. It's a very good watch, and it's very interesting. And the 80 minutes will fly by like that because you'll be so into it, all right? Well, this is Old Man Kelly. I hope you enjoyed my little history lesson of the Passion of Joan of Arc. I'll be back soon with another history lesson.